The impetus for this was going through a massive pile, an accumulation of stamps I picked up over the years. None of them really, or almost none of them explicitly stamps that I wanted, but they came with what I wanted. And we all get stuff like that, I guess.
Mhm.
And most of it is very, very common stuff. But on the theory that you can make lemonade from lemons, I started looking at the cancellations, and I had a good time. In the middle of the 19th century, when stamps in the United States were first being canceled, by and large, the cancellations were not of great interest. They would be grills, hash marks, and things like that, and darkened circles, and of course, the ubiquitous pen cancel. But as time went by, postmasters who were not instructed exactly how they had to cancel the mail, they were just told to kill that stamp so it's not reused. And they came up with all kinds of clever things they liked themselves. The term used, generally speaking, is fancy cancels. And these are ones that were done at the postmaster's discretion. For instance, the one on the left is a variety of what's known as the Masonic cancel. That's a very smeared image, but it's based on the Masonic compass and square in the symbol of the Masons.
Uh-huh.
The next one is obviously just a triangle with another small triangle in it. Then you get something that someone decided to use the iron cross, or sort of the Maltese cross pattern. The next one, the orange one, is called a starburst by some people. And the one on the right, I wish it were better. That is a 5-pointed star inside a pentagon. And they
And
can
it's
be
in
really
blue
nice
ink.
if you get them.
And the ink color makes a large difference in the value with a lot of these early issues.
In fact, that's where I was going next. The cancellations were almost always done in black, but on occasion, again, because there was no directive from Washington as to how you cancel these things, it was just obliterate them, please. And so this is the sort of thing you can get: orange, red, blue, or among others. And Steve is right. The catalog, the specialized catalog, will often give a higher valuation to those things. I'm not sure how many collectors get to that level, though. I really don't know. But I just enjoyed the shape of these things.
Yeah.
The point I was trying to make with this was that you'll notice that there is no postal information on the stamp. All they're doing is destroying the stamp so it won't be reused. All the postal markings will be on the envelope. And that's interesting, I thought. That will change over time, of course. The other observation I have is that I'm basically a collector of Western Europe. And you don't see in Western Europe these kind of very globbish, smeared cancellations of a stamp, at least in my experience. The cancellations may be very heavy, but they will be
Distinct and clear.
Thank you. That's the perfect word. Thank you. They'll be distinct. And these things are just, somebody just said, make sure no one uses this again. There you go. But
Great Britain was kind of that
okay.
way too, right? Weren't the early British stamps kind of heavily obliterated sometimes?
Yeah,
They
I've got
were,
one,
Yes,
sir.
they are.
but
But they had
very-
like the Maltese cross and stuff. Like they still had specific
Uh,
cancellations.
They had numbers, and but they would just obliterate it with whatever the number killer was, or I guess whatever it
Yeah,
was.
the
That's
number
right.
would tell you the post office.
Exactly. And that was not at the postmaster's discretion. They had to use that canceling device.
Mhm.
And like you say, they were numbered. And as Steve said, they were pretty distinctive, distinctly imprinted too.
Roger,
Okay, so-
were you inspired at all by the latest APS magazine or?
No, I was inspired by a wife who said, "Get that crap out of here." You know, they
Oh,
were in
well,
bags and bags and bags.
Yeah,
I
that's
felt
very plausible. I can understand.
we have no idea what you're talking about. Roger.
Yes, I think we can all identify.
Oh, I certainly can.
Going through all this stuff, I came across this book, A Guide to Grading and Expertizing. It's a terrific book, isn't it? I tried to get a couple of copies for the club, but it's not in print, and I can't get it from Abe, and I can't get it from Amazon. I'll tell you, it put the fear of the Lord in me. I have a lot of stuff, and condition is so important in the valuation of a stamp, you know?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of stuff. And gee, that's a really nice $85 stamp. Well, according to this book, it's a really nice $8 stamp.
So
But
who
if you see
published
this-
that?
A group called
Oh.
Professional Stamp Experts. I really recommend the book. I will try to find some for people for a lot of reasons. It's also just beautiful to look at. It's
Yeah, that
really-
cover is great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the printing inside is extraordinary.
Yeah, they have really good illustrations and, examples of, what to look for.
Exactly. And to give you the gist of it very quickly, stamp grading comes down to two things: centering, how well is the image centered on the piece of paper you have, and the other thing they use the word soundness.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
no thins, no tears.
Right.
Right. And in relation to cancellations, which I'm talking about here, cancellations also should be clear. They shouldn't deface a portrait and so on. A small point that I'm trying to make is that because they didn't put postal information on the stamp, generally speaking, the condition of the stamp is always decreased by the cancel, almost always anyway, because there's nothing in that that grabs your eye. Like, here's an example. This 2 cent from the 1869 series. It's poorly centered, as are almost all stamps from that series. And it's just got a smear of a cancellation on it. If you look really close to the right, though, you see what looks like a
Mhm.
circular date,
Yes.
but I could not interpret it. So this is sort of, I'm calling this a transition between the time when they start putting information on the stamp as well as the envelope. Now, this is a stamp that did have very careful cancellation on it, and I did not get this thing in Kilaware, believe me. But the reason this cancel is interesting is it's international. It's from New York
Yes.
to Great Britain.
Packet
And
stamp.
it
That's
mattered
great.
very much what ship from what nation carried the stamp. The rate was 30 cents, and I forget the exact breakdown. Of that, the United States got 6 cents for getting it to the packet boat. Britain got about 8 cents for finishing the delivery in London or in Great Britain. And the remaining 14 or 16 cents went to the packet boat itself as cargo. It was a fee. And if you know how to read these cancellations, you can break that down with a great degree of accuracy. So anyway, this is up on the board, if you will, as a counterexample to the mere fact of let's just cancel this sucker, make sure no one ever uses it again. This has a lot of information. And this stamp is just prior to the Civil War. And that's kind of rare to find postal information on stamps that were issued prior to the Civil War. This is a pair that I got somewhere. I know I didn't pay hardly anything for it. And this one is from New Bedford. And this is a pre-war cancel as well.
That's
But I don't
beautiful.
know the year. And even though it's obviously quite nicked on the right, yeah, like getting a town name on a stamp from that era, 1857 approximately, is a lot of fun, at least for me. Here are a couple immediately after the war that are beginning to use the city or community name on it. To the left is Bath. there are about 12 baths in the US at that time, but I do believe this is Bath, Maine, because the final letter on the bottom is an E, and the word seems to be about the length of what Maine would be spelled out as. It's not
Yeah,
a
that's
great stamp, clearly, but
That
the
wasn't
one
till
on the
late-
right, I thought I really had something nice here. This is from Old Point, Virginia,
Mm.
but it's after the war. The reason I was reading the date upside down, and I thought it was 1863 or something like that. Old Point is in Hampton, Virginia, and it is of interest to history buffs because it is one of two places in the state of Virginia that never joined the Confederacy, because Fort Monroe is at Old Point,
Oh, yeah.
and they would not yield the fort. As soon
Mm.
as the firing was done on Sumter, Lincoln reinforced as many forts as he could, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico, but also Fort Monroe, which is at the mouth of the Chesapeake. And but it's after the war, so it's not as interesting to me. So fancy cancels. Now this is one of my favorite fancy cancels, the running goose.
Oh,
However, is it
I would have-
really a running goose? I've never
So-
come across any reference. I've
That's
come
like
across
a Rorschach
dogs,
test.
Really?
and donkeys and elephants and so on, but I'm choosing to
Roger,
call this.
if you had not said that or had it on there, I would have never visualized it.
Well, I'm desperate, you
Well,
see. Anyway, so that's in the eye of the beholder sometimes. Okay, so then comes the machine cancels starting in Boston, and they take over rapidly. Of course, this note here says that the machine could do 25,000 postcards in an hour. That would be what the unions call a rate buster if that was by hand. So during the banknote era, which is roughly 1869 to 94, by banknote, I mean that was the era in which the American banknote, the national banknote, and the Continental Banknote Company
Continental, yeah.
did most of the printing. Not all, but most of the printing of US stamps. And here you still get fancy cancels during this time. This is a cogwheel or a gear, and that's very much like Bavaria canceled with for the first 20 years of its postal system, maybe longer. And the other one is of interest to me. Again, I'm looking for gold dust in a real pile of mud here. This one is a reverse kind of a cancel where they leave the word clear, the letters clear, and they cancel everything else in sight, which kind of a waste of ink, I suppose.
Yeah.
I kind of assume that D is the last letter in paid or something like that.
Could be, yeah.
And this was on a big package of some kind, but I don't know. Can anybody help me with this? I looked around, I was wondering, did somehow Western Union get involved in, but I don't think so. I think
Well-
special delivery stamps would typically have been canceled by the mail carrier himself. And this may be his personal initial or something, or
I think it looks like the symbol for the Leipzig Fair, but I don't think the Germans canceled this stamp.
Yeah, that's right. It does
No,
resemble that,
probably
doesn't
not.
it?
so then you get to the machine cancels, and I'm wrapping this up now. My interest in this era turns to fancy designs. The airplane on the right is one I truly love, and I always keep a stamp, no matter how cheap it is, if it has that on it.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool cancel, and there are several varieties of it. You know, different aspects of the plane in flight.
Well, if you're still trying to squeeze some entertainment value out of your collection, and it's mostly junk, I still like slogan cancels if they relate to what the stamp itself is. And there's a Century of Progress stamp that was in Chicago in 32-3, and it's stamped that way. It's canceled that way as well. So I keep it.
Mhm.
Also, I try to identify if there's some information on there. Can anyone tell me what DAV means and why it would
Yes.
be on a stamp?
Disabled American veterans.
Right. So I looked it up. It is indeed the Disabled American Veterans, a group formed in 1920, and this is the 50th anniversary in 1970.
Mhm.
Well, that's a real collectible.
Well, the stamp is a nickel stamp, but it's fun to have, you know. This is the airplane again, and if we
Yeah.
hear about varieties, I will just say, the reason I get a kick out of this cancellation was used. Now, I didn't know there were varieties. It simply says, airmail saves time. The
Mhm.
history of United States airmail is extraordinarily complex. I will not get into it, but it was done experimentally. Then it was done by the Army. Then it was contracted out. Then there were scandals with the contracts. The Army picked it up again. They kept crashing. And finally, it was sent out to commercial aircraft. But these stamps, going roughly in order from upper left, would be typically to 1925, 1932. That's the Los Angeles Olympics.
Mhm.
This is part of the Farleys. So that's 34, I think. And finally, the 6-cent stamp is 1938. But you notice it's the same plane on every stamp. By
Yeah.
1938, this is like putting a horsewhip and a buggy and saying, we recommend you send it by car. That plane is so obsolete. We had the China Clipper at this time. The Japanese had the Zero. The British had the Spitfire in development. And this is what they canceled the stamp with. It's like
yeah,
something
it's-
out of a museum.
It's
Yeah.
almost the
getting-
jet age at this point, because 1943, the Germans had fighter jets flying.
Exactly. And this one is telling you to use this old, I'll call it a Jenny biplane, in which the mail was carried in a bag in the back seat of the plane.
You know, those cancels are not all the same.
No.
If you
You
look
see
at them
it-
carefully, there are minor differences in the plane, the propeller,
Oh, that's
the
true.
the shading of
struts.
the wing.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
similar, but they're not. You might actually be able to catalog all the different types of those.
Finally, just about finally, there are local slogan cancels. The one on the left is Baltimore Week. That's a celebration that goes on every October, even today.
Mm.
And the one on the right was, again, one I had to look up, and you learn a little history. When you put all these cancels together on the right, you can read,
Oh, yeah.
"Let's go, Citizens Military Training
Training
Camp."
camps.
And I had no idea what that was all about. And people were so appalled at how unprepared the United States was for World War I that they thought they better train young men, a certain amount of young men every summer in these military camps in case trouble popped up again.
Oh,
And so the deal was you would go for 1 month for 4 summers in a row. And then if you were called into military service, you went in as an NCO, not a buck private. So that was the deal. Many famous people actually did it. I believe Harry Truman was one of them who did it.
interesting.
Of course, he had served in World War I as well. So maybe he was helping to run the camp. I don't know. And so I'm all done. And this presentation is null and void. Void, do you hear me?